Humanity's battleship obliterates the Council's stronghold to nothing. The alarm did not give us a warning. It simply screamed. I was 3 hours into my shift at the tactical station aboard the Iron Cruiser when every console on the bridge lit up at once. Red light washed over the faces of my crew, and the low hum of the ship's engines shifted into something deeper, something that moved through the floor and up into your bones. My name is Nathan Cole, and I had served aboard the cruiser for 2 years. I thought I had seen everything a junior tactical officer could see. I was wrong. The message came in on the high priority channel. It did not ask. It did not invite. It declared. The Galactic Council, that ancient gathering of species who had divided the stars between themselves long before humanity ever looked up and wondered what lived out there, had issued a formal summons to our vessel. We were ordered to present ourselves at the Council's Stronghold, a structure so large it cast a shadow over the moon it orbited, within 36 standard hours. Captain Leon Marsh read the message once. He did not read it again. He folded his hands on the arm of his command chair, looked out at the star field ahead of us, and said very quietly, "Plot the course." That was all. I had met Leon Marsh 2 years ago when I first came aboard. He was not a loud man. He was not someone who filled a room with noise, or tried to make himself large. He was tall and lean, with gray at his temples and eyes the color of cold water. When he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because he never wasted a word. In all my time serving under him, I had seen him raise his voice exactly once, and that was when a crewman had made a mistake that nearly cost 4 people their lives. Even then, it had not been a shout. It had been a controlled, careful thing, precise and sharp as a blade. That quality frightened the aliens we dealt with far more than any amount of shouting ever would have. Our ship was called the Verity. She was not the largest vessel in the human fleet, but she was the newest, and she carried systems that had never been tested in a real conflict. The hull was layered in composite materials that the Council's own scientists had quietly tried to obtain samples of through back channels for 2 years. The drive system ran on a principle that 3 alien universities had declared theoretically impossible, right up until we flew past one of their outposts at speeds their instruments could barely track. She was, in every sense that mattered, a demonstration. Every time she moved through space, she said something to the galaxy without speaking a single word. I remember thinking, as we turned onto the new heading and the stars shifted in the viewport, that the Verity herself seemed to understand where we were going. The ship felt different somehow, steadier, like she was drawing a breath. The crew knew what this summons meant. Everybody aboard did. The Council had been building toward this for a long time. When humanity first made contact with the wider galaxy, the reaction had not been the warm welcome that some of our older storytellers had imagined. The alien species who ran the Council had looked at us with something between curiosity and alarm, and that alarm had quickly hardened into policy. They had called us aggressive. They had pointed to our history, to the fact that we had spent centuries fighting each other, developing technologies designed not to explore but to win. They had looked at our warships and called them excessive. They had looked at our speed of innovation and called it dangerous. Within the first decade of contact, the Council had placed humanity under what they called a development limitation order. That was the official name. What it meant in practice was that they wanted to decide what we were allowed to build, what systems we were permitted to access, and how far into the galaxy we were permitted to travel, without their approval. Humanity had listened to all of this with the patience that comes from knowing you are outnumbered. Then humanity had quietly continued doing exactly what humanity does. I pulled up the intelligence files on the Stronghold during the first few hours of our journey. The place had many names across the different Council languages, but humans had simply started calling it the Anchor, because it sat at the gravitational center of the Council's territory, and everything important ran through it. It was not just a station. It was a city, a fortress, a seat of power, and a monument all at once. 17 species maintained permanent embassies there. The combined defense fleet assigned to protect it numbered somewhere between 400 and 600 warships, depending on which estimate you trusted. It had never been threatened. Not once in its 900-year history had any force even considered moving against it. I looked at those numbers, and then I looked around the bridge of the Verity. There were 41 of us on the command deck. Our communications officer, a sharp, quiet woman named Donna Price, caught me looking at the numbers on my screen and gave me a small nod, as if she understood exactly what I was thinking. She had been in deep space service for 8 years, and had survived 2 separate incidents that should, by any reasonable calculation, have ended her career, along with her life. She had come out of both of them, with a calm that was either earned or inborn. I was never sure which. "They want to make an example," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear it. "They've been watching us for 2 years, trying to find the right moment. They think this is it." "Is it?" I asked. She thought about that for a moment. "I think they've confused patience with weakness," she said. "That's the last mistake they're going to make." I turned that sentence over in my mind for most of the next day. We stopped once, briefly, at a relay point near the edge of the inner systems. Another human vessel was waiting there, a smaller courier ship. Its captain transmitted a sealed package directly to Captain Marsh, and nothing else. No greeting, no communication, just the package. Marsh received it in his private office, and came back to the bridge 20 minutes later, with his expression entirely unchanged, except that something behind his eyes had gone very still. He looked at the view screen and the distant stars and simply said, "We continue." Whatever was in that package, I did not ask about it. You learn, in this line of work, when a question will be answered, and when it will only slow things down. As we came into the outer range of the Stronghold sensor net during the final hours of our approach, I began picking up the first returns on the long-range display. The sheer scale of the place made the instruments hesitate before they could process it. The Stronghold was not a structure so much as an assembled world. Rings within rings, towers reaching out into space at every angle, docking bays the size of small cities, and around it all, like a slow and deliberate constellation, the shapes of warships moving in patrol patterns that had probably not changed in 100 years. Captain Marsh came and stood beside my station. He looked at the display for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "How many of their ships can your board currently track?" I checked the numbers. 286 confirmed, sir. Probably another 100 behind the station's mass shadow. He nodded once, the way you nod when something confirms what you already knew. "Keep the passive sensors only," he said. "Don't light up anything active. I want to arrive looking like we came to talk." "Yes, sir." He walked back to his chair. The bridge was very quiet. Outside the viewport, the Stronghold grew larger with every passing minute, its towers and rings beginning to resolve into detail, its running lights blinking in slow, self-important rhythms, as if the structure itself believed nothing in the universe could touch it. I leaned back in my seat and felt the deep, engine breath of the Verity beneath me. She felt ready. I was not sure I felt the same, but I knew one thing with complete certainty. Whatever was about to happen inside that place, we had not come all this way to stand quietly in a corner and accept a verdict that had been written before we ever arrived. We had come because the Council had summoned us, and we had come because Leon Marsh and every person on this ship understood something that the Council did not. When you summon something you are afraid of, you should be very sure you are ready for it to show up. The Verity moved through the outer defense ring without challenge. The Council's automated systems scanned us, logged our registration, and opened a lane. They expected us to come in small. They expected us to come in quiet. We did both. But quiet and small are not the same as weak, and the Verity had never, in all her brief history, been weak. The Stronghold filled the entire forward viewport now. Behind me, I heard someone on the crew let out a slow breath. Somewhere ahead of us, the Council was waiting in their great chamber, confident, prepared, surrounded by the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy, certain they were about to put humanity in its place once and for all. They had no idea that the reckoning they had been so carefully planning had just docked at their front door. The Council chamber was built to make you feel small. That was the first thing I noticed when the holo feed from our ambassador's team came through to the bridge. I had been given permission to monitor the transmission directly from my tactical station, so that I could flag anything in the security environment that looked wrong. What I saw instead was a room designed by architects who understood power as a physical sensation. The ceiling was so high that the upper levels disappeared into a manufactured haze of soft light. The delegate platforms rose in curved tiers, each species seated above the ones they considered beneath them, and at the highest point, the senior council members looked down at the floor of the chamber, the way a person looks down at something they are about to step on. Our ambassador, a tall man named Gerald Park, stood at the floor-level podium. He had spent 12 years in diplomatic service. He had negotiated 3 separate trade accords and 2 border agreements under conditions that would have broken most people. He stood now with his hands folded in front of him, his posture perfectly straight, and if the ceiling and the tears and the downward stares affected him in any way, his body did not admit it. The council's chief speaker was a creature called Vositan, representing the Kethrani, the oldest species in the council, and the one that considered itself the final word on almost everything. Vositan had 4 arms, a layered voice that sounded like 2 people talking at once, and an expression I had learned over time to read as contempt. The Kethrani had been civilized, by their own account, for 11,000 years. They liked to mention this. They mentioned it now. Humanity, Vositan began, the word carrying in it a particular inflection I had heard before. The way a person says the name of something they consider a problem, has been granted the privilege of this audience, in order that certain matters of galactic law be addressed formally, and with clarity. It would benefit your representative to listen carefully, as the council does not intend to repeat these proceedings. Gerald Park said nothing. He waited. I had my hands on my console, watching the security feed, and also watching the broader sensor display that showed the Stronghold's defense fleet continuing its patrol cycles outside. Nothing had changed. Nothing had moved in a way that suggested immediate action. But I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous moments were not the ones that looked dangerous. They were the ones that looked routine. Donna Price, at the station beside mine, had opened a quiet channel to the engine room. Not to pass a message, just to have it open, ready. Vositan began to speak, and what came out of its layered voice was an accusation built like a monument. It had foundations, and walls, and height, and weight. The council accused humanity of 17 separate violations of the Development Limitation Order. They had examples, timestamps, sensor records, witness accounts from 3 species who had observed human vessels operating in restricted zones. They had records of human shipyards producing vessels beyond the approved specifications. They had evidence, they said, of humanity developing weapons systems that had not been approved, reviewed, or sanctioned by any council body. Every item on the list was accurate. That was the thing. They had done their work carefully. Every accusation was true. Humanity had built what it wanted to build. Humanity had gone where it needed to go. Humanity had refused, quietly and without announcement, to accept that a group of species who had spent 1,000 years dividing the galaxy among themselves had any legitimate authority to tell us what we were allowed to become. Gerald Park listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not shift his weight or look away. When Vositan finally finished, the chamber was silent in that particular way that large rooms go silent when everyone in them is waiting for a reaction. Gerald Park said, "I would like to present a response." Vositan's upper set of arms moved in the gesture that, for the Kethrani, meant granted, but barely. What Gerald Park presented over the next 40 minutes was not a defense, it was a record. He brought forward the documented history of what the Council had done to humanity in the years since contact. The funding routed through intermediary species to arm groups that had raided human colony ships in the outer systems. The 3 separate incidents in which Council-flagged vessels had provided intelligence to hostile actors that had been used in attacks on human settlements. The deliberate manipulation of trade access that had been designed to keep humanity economically dependent on Council-approved species for resources that humanity could, and eventually did, source independently. He laid it all out in the same calm, organized voice he would have used to describe a logistics report. The chamber did not go quiet this time. It erupted. Delegates were speaking over each other in 6 languages, and the translation systems struggled to keep up. Several of the middle-tier species who had always been uncomfortable with the Council's treatment of humanity were now visibly agitated. A Suvari delegate, a species that had been admitted to the Council only 40 years ago and had never quite been trusted by the older members, stood and called for the session to be paused for review. Vositan silenced it all with a single raised arm. "The evidence provided by the human representative," Vositan said, each word separated from the next with deliberate weight, "is not recognized as relevant to the proceedings at hand. The Council's administrative decisions are not subject to review by species under development limitation. This session exists not to debate the Council's conduct, but to address humanity's violations and receive humanity's commitment to full compliance going forward. Gerald Park looked up at Vossiadan with an expression I had never seen on a diplomat's face before. It was not anger. It was not despair. It was something much simpler than either of those things. It was the look of a person who has just confirmed something they already knew. He said, "And if humanity does not offer that commitment?" Vossitan's forearms spread slightly, the gesture for obvious conclusion. Then the Council will act to enforce compliance through any means considered appropriate. The vessel that brought your delegation to this stronghold will be held pending review. Your transit permissions will be revoked. And the human colonies in the outer systems will be placed under direct Council administrative oversight until such time as humanity demonstrates a willingness to operate within the framework all other species have accepted. I heard Captain Marsh's voice come through the private command channel. He was not on the feed. He was on the bridge, watching the same transmission I was watching. His voice was very quiet. "Nathan," he said, using my first name, which he almost never did, "start warming the secondary drive systems. Keep it below the threshold, their sensors will flag as active. Just warm them." "Yes, sir," I said. My hands moved before I had fully finished the thought. On the holo feed, Gerald Park was speaking again. "The Council has presented its position clearly. I want to make sure the record shows that humanity heard it, understood it, and gave it full consideration." "Noted," said Vossitan. "What is humanity's answer?" Gerald Park looked up at the high tiers, at Vossitan, and the other senior delegates looking down at him from their elevated positions, and he said, very simply and very clearly, "Humanity's answer is no." For a moment, the word just sat there in the chamber. Then Vossitan said something in the Kethrani language that the translation system rendered as the activation of a formal enforcement order, and simultaneously, on my tactical display, I watched the defense fleet outside the stronghold begin to move, not in patrol patterns, in convergence patterns. Every vessel in the perimeter was turning, slowly and with practiced authority, toward the docking bay where the Verity was birthed. They had planned this. They had planned it before Gerald Park ever walked into that chamber. The hearing had never been a hearing. It had been a formality, a performance staged, to give the Council's action the appearance of process. Captain Marsh's voice came through the channel again. "All hands," he said, and now he was speaking to the entire ship. "We are leaving. Navigation. Plot the extraction course we prepared. Engineering. Bring the main drive to full readiness. Tactical. Begin active scanning. I want full awareness in 30 seconds. I hit the active sensor switch. The Verity lit up like a star going nova. Every passive return that had been quietly assembling in the background of my display suddenly snapped into focus. I could see every ship in the defense fleet. I could see their weapon systems coming online. I could see the stronghold itself beginning to cycle its external defense platforms, enormous structures built into the station's outer rings that were designed to deal with anything short of a full fleet engagement. They were pointing all of it at one ship, at us. I had a strange feeling in that moment. Not fear, exactly. Something more complex than fear. It was the feeling of standing at the top of a very high place and realizing that the height itself means nothing if you know how to move. "Sir," I said, "I'm reading 412 vessels on active approach vectors. Estimated time to weapons range, 6 minutes. "Thank you, Nathan," said Captain Marsh. On the secondary display, I could see the ambassador's team already moving. They had been briefed. They knew exactly what to do when this moment came, because Captain Marsh had briefed them before we ever arrived, because Captain Marsh had known what kind of summons this was from the moment the message came in. The chamber on the holo feed was in controlled chaos. Vossitan was speaking rapidly into a private channel. The Suvari delegate had stood again and was shouting something about process. Security personnel were moving through the lower levels of the chamber toward the position where Gerald Park had been standing. Where he had been standing. He was already gone, Captain Marsh said, in the same tone he used for everything. Tactical. "Let's show them what our sensors look like at full power." I pulled up the active broadcast array and pushed it to 100% output. On every screen in the stronghold, on every bridge in that fleet of 412 ships, on every console in the council chamber itself, Every sensor, every radar return, every energy signature that the Verity was generating suddenly became visible all at once. The Verity, at full active power, did not look like one ship. She looked like the beginning of something much, much larger. I watched the fleet's approach speed drop by 30% in the space of 15 seconds, as captain after captain looked at their displays and asked the same question: what exactly are we looking at? Captain Marsh stood up from his command chair. "Bring us out," he said, and the Verity moved. She did not ease out of the docking bay. She came out the way water comes through a broken dam, fast and without apology, and I felt the acceleration in my chest, even through the inertial dampeners. The docking bay fell behind us in seconds, and then we were in open space, and the full weight of what we were facing became visible on every display at once. 412 ships. Most of them were in the medium to heavy class, the kind of vessels that Council species built when they wanted to make a point about their military standing. They moved in practiced formations, the kind that had been drilled into those crews over decades of exercises against threats that had never actually materialized. They were good ships, crewed by competent people who believed in the strength of their numbers. From their perspective, there was no situation in which one human vessel posed a meaningful problem to what they had assembled. I understood their perspective. I also understood why it was wrong. "Nathan," said Captain Marsh, "what is the lead formation doing?" I checked the display. "They're holding at 3,000 kilometers, sir. 3 wings. Spread formation. Front wing is heaviest. I'm reading charge signatures on their forward weapons systems." "They're going to fire a warning shot," said our weapons officer, a compact, red-haired man named Oliver Grant, from his station on my right. Oliver had the kind of stillness that came from years of working around things that could go wrong catastrophically. He looked at the weapon signatures the way a doctor looks at a patient's chart, gathering information without alarm. "They want us to stop and acknowledge their authority before they commit to a full engagement. Let them fire it," said Captain Marsh. I looked at him. He was watching the main view screen. "Sir, if they fire, let them fire it," he said again. "I want them to see what happens when it hits us." I understood then. This was not a battle yet. This was a demonstration. Captain Marsh was not fighting these ships. He was teaching them something. The warning shot came from the lead vessel in the front wing, a heavy cruiser called, according to our intelligence files, the Primacy of Order, which was exactly the kind of name the Council liked to give its ships. The beam it fired was a standard yield deterrent pulse, powerful enough to leave a significant mark on a vessel that was not prepared for it, strong enough to make any reasonable crew stop and reconsider their course of action. It hit the Verity's forward section. The energy absorption system the Verity carried, the one that 3 alien universities had declared theoretically impossible, and that human engineers had spent 4 years building and testing in conditions of absolute secrecy, took the pulse apart the moment it made contact. Not deflected, not blocked, absorbed, converted, and routed into the secondary power grid in the space of a fraction of a second. On the bridge, the lights brightened slightly, as the secondary grid received a small but notable charge. Oliver Grant looked at his power display and said, very quietly, "Thank you." On the tactical display, I watched the reaction propagate through the Council fleet. The formation hesitated. I do not mean that individual ships paused in a calculated way. I mean that the entire formation lost its coherence for about 15 seconds, because every captain in it was looking at their sensor returns and asking the same question: why is the human ship brighter than it was before we fired? Captain Marsh said, "Oliver, I want a return message. Pick the Primacy of Order. I want them to know we received their communication. Power level, sir? Enough to knock out their forward weapons array. No hull breach, no casualties. Clean." Oliver's hands moved on his board. The Verity's forward emitter built up its charge in 0.4 seconds, and then released it in a pulse that was so precisely shaped it looked almost delicate on the energy display. A thin line of focused output that crossed the 3,000-kilometer gap between us and the Primacy of Order in almost no time at all. The Primacy of Order's forward weapons array went dark. Not the whole ship, not the engines or the life support or the bridge systems, just the weapons. Every targeting sensor, every emitter, every power coupling running to their forward battery, shut off, as cleanly as if someone had walked inside and unplugged them. The Council fleet stopped moving. I am not exaggerating when I say that 412 ships, with a combined crew of several 100,000 beings, collectively lost their certainty in the space of about 10 seconds. Donna Price had the comm channels open. "Sir," she said, "I'm picking up communication traffic between the fleet elements. A lot of it. They're asking each other what happened to the primacy of orders systems." "Are they asking us anything?" said Captain Marsh. "Not yet." "They will," he said. He was right. 30 seconds later, a signal came in on the hailing frequency. It was Vossi Tan, not a fleet commander, not a military officer. Vossi Tan, the Council's chief speaker, the senior political authority at the Stronghold, was on the line personally. The fact that it was Vossi Tan and not a tactical commander told me something important. The military people in that fleet had already communicated something upward that had made the political people at the top feel they needed to be involved. The military people had looked at their sensor returns, at the way their weapons fire had been absorbed, at the surgical precision with which the primacy of order had been disarmed, and they had told Vossi Tan that this was not a situation the fleet could simply resolve by overwhelming one ship. Vossi Tan's voice, when it came through the channel, had changed. The layered quality was still there, but the weight behind it was different, slightly less certain. "Human vessel," it said. "This fleet is authorized under Council Resolution 7741 to enforce the detention order placed on your ship. You are required to stand down your active systems and submit to boarding for inspection." Captain Marsh leaned forward in his chair. "Vossi Tan," he said, "I want you to look at your fleet's sensor returns right now and tell me honestly whether you believe a boarding action is the next logical step." A pause, longer than a communication delay would explain. "Your vessel is surrounded," Vossi Tan said. "Yes," said Captain Marsh, "we are. And your lead ship's weapons are offline, because we turned them off from here, from a range of 3,000 kilometers, in less than half a second." "Now," he stopped, "let that sit." Then he continued, "I am giving you an opportunity to withdraw this fleet and allow us free passage. I want that on the record. I am giving you this opportunity. What you do with it is your decision." Another pause. I was watching the fleet display. Some of the ships in the outer wings were adjusting their positions. Small movements, almost instinctive, the way a person shifts their weight when they are not sure of their footing. Vossi Tan said, "The Council does not negotiate under." "I'm not negotiating," Captain Marsh said. "I'm offering. There's a difference. An offer has a timer." The pause this time was shorter. When Vossi Tan spoke again, the layered voice had tightened. "This fleet will advance in 30 seconds. Any hostile action from your vessel will be met with a full engagement response." Captain Marsh looked at me. "Nathan," he said, "how many of their ships have active weapon locks on us right now?" I checked the display. 209, sir. The rest are still. 209, he said. He nodded once. "Oliver," he said, "I want all 209 of those weapons arrays offline. Same parameters as before. No hull damage, no casualties. I want it done before Vossi Tan finishes its count." Oliver looked at his board. "I want to explain what happened next, because it is the kind of thing that is difficult to describe without sounding as though you are making it up. The Verity had been designed around a specific philosophy, one that human weapons engineers had spent years developing from first principles, rather than building on any existing galactic model. The core of that philosophy was that a weapon's most important quality was not its power, but its precision. Any species with enough resources could build something that made a large explosion. The hard part, the part that took 4 years and the quiet brilliance of engineers, who had never been given any credit in any history that would be written about this day, was building something that could be precise at scale. What Oliver Grant did in the next 12 seconds was direct the Verity's weapons systems across 209 separate targets simultaneously, each output shaped and timed to hit exactly the weapons coupling architecture of each specific vessel type, because the Intelligence Division had spent 2 years cataloging every class of ship in the Council's defense fleet, mapping their internal power routing, identifying exactly where to hit them to take their weapons offline without touching anything else. 209 ships. 12 seconds. Not one weapon remained active in that fleet. Not one crew member was injured. The silence on the comm channel after it happened was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I sat at my station and watched the display show me 209 vessels that were, for all tactical purposes, unarmed, and around them, another 200 ships that had not yet locked weapons and were now in the position of watching their comrades' systems go dark without any visible cause. Donna Price said, very quietly, "Sir, communication traffic in the fleet has gone to almost zero. They've stopped talking to each other." "Why?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. She looked at her board. "Because they don't know what to say." Captain Marsh stood up from his chair. He had been sitting through all of it, the warning shot, the disarming of the primacy of order, the offer, Vossi Tan's response, all of it, sitting with the same stillness he always carried. Now he stood, and he walked slowly to the front of the bridge, and he looked out at the stronghold filling the viewport, and the drifting, disarmed shapes of the fleet around it. "Vossi Tan," he said, "your fleet is disarmed. Not destroyed, disarmed. Every ship that had a weapon lock on us has had its weapon systems taken offline. The ships are intact, the crews are unharmed, and every one of those systems can be brought back up in a matter of hours by their own engineers. I have not ended a single life today." He stopped. Then he said, "But this is the moment where the conversation changes, because what I've just shown you is a fraction of what this ship can do. And I want you to understand, clearly, before we move to what comes next, that every action I've taken so far has been chosen specifically because I did not want casualties. That was my choice. It can remain my choice. Or you can make a different choice for me." Vossi Tan did not respond for almost a full minute. When it did, the layered voice was doing something I had never heard it do before. It was unsteady. "What?" it said. "Are you asking for?" Captain Marsh said, "I'm asking for the same thing Gerald Park asked for in that chamber. Acknowledgement that the evidence of the Council's conduct against human interests is legitimate, suspension of the development limitation order, and free passage for this vessel and all human ships going forward." Vossi Tan said, "The full Council would need to—" "The full Council," Captain Marsh said, "can discuss it from a position of having seen what one human ship does to 400 combat vessels in 12 seconds. I imagine the discussion will move quickly." I heard something then that I had never heard in my life. I heard silence that was made of fear, not the silence of a room waiting to see what happens, the silence of a mind that has just understood something it cannot take back. Vossi Tan said, "We will need time." Captain Marsh said, "You have until we reach the stronghold's inner perimeter. After that, I start having a different kind of conversation with that structure." He turned and walked back to his chair and sat down. I looked at Oliver Grant. Oliver was watching his board with the same calm expression he always wore. He caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. Around us, the disarmed fleet of the Galactic Council sat in space, like a collection of very large and very quiet monuments, to the distance between what someone believes they can do and what the universe is actually prepared to allow. And the Verity moved forward, steady and certain, toward the stronghold that had stood unthreatened for 900 years. That was about to change. I want to be honest about what I felt as the stronghold grew in the viewport. It was not excitement. It was something heavier than that. A kind of weight that settles in your chest when you understand that what is about to happen will not be undone. History does not give you a second chance to not make it. It happens, and then it is a thing that happened, and the world on the other side of it is different from the world before. I had joined the service because I believed in humanity's right to exist in this galaxy on its own terms. I had believed that from the moment I understood what the Council's development limitation order actually meant, which was that a group of older, more established species had decided that our potential frightened them, and that frightened them enough to try to put a ceiling on what we were allowed to become. I had believed that was wrong. I still believed it. But belief does not prepare you for the physical reality of what enforcing that belief looks like when you are sitting at the tactical station, and the stronghold is 300 kilometers away, and your captain has just told Vossi Tan that the conversation is about to change. Captain Marsh had given them time. They had not used it well. What they had done, in the minutes between his warning and our arrival at the inner perimeter, was attempt to power up the stronghold's own defense systems, the enormous external platforms built into the outer rings that I had noticed on our initial approach. They had done this quietly, without announcement. probably hoping that our sensors would miss it or misread it as a routine system check. Our sensors did not miss it. "Sir," I said, "the Stronghold is bringing its external platform grid online. I'm reading 8 primary batteries and what looks like 48 secondary emitters distributed across the ring structure. Energy levels? Building. The primary batteries are at 60% and climbing. The secondaries are already at full charge." I watched the numbers on my display. At their current rate, the primaries will reach full charge in about 4 minutes. "What are those primaries designed for?" asked Captain Marsh. Oliver Grant answered without looking up from his board. "Fleet engagements. They're built to deal with coordinated attacks by multiple vessels at range, against a single target at this distance." He paused, calculating. "At full charge, each one could do significant structural damage to a vessel our size if it got through." "If it got through," said Captain Marsh. "Yes, sir. If." Captain Marsh was quiet for a moment. I could see, on the secondary display, the inner perimeter marker. We would cross it in 90 seconds. The primary batteries were at 72%. "Donna," he said, "open a channel to the Stronghold command frequency." "Open, sir," he said. "This is Captain Leon Marsh of the human vessel Verity. I am watching your defense platforms charging. I want to be very direct with you about what happens if those platforms fire. This is not a threat. This is an explanation. If those platforms fire on this ship, I will not disable them selectively. I will remove them. Every one of them, and the physical structure they are embedded in, will be affected by that removal. I do not want to do that. I am asking you to stand those systems down." No response came. The primary batteries hit 80%. I looked at Captain Marsh. He was looking at the viewport. Then he did something I did not expect. He turned to me and said, "Nathan, what does your judgment tell you? Is there anything left to try before we do this?" I had never been asked that before. Not in that way. Not by him. I thought about it seriously, because he was asking me to, and because the question deserved a serious answer. I thought about the council chamber and Gerald Park standing at that podium. I thought about Voss Eaton's voice going unsteady on the comm channel. I thought about the 400 ships now drifting without weapons in the space behind us. I thought about the colonies in the outer systems, the people living on those worlds who had been living under the quiet threat of council administrative oversight for years. The people who would keep living under it if we failed to make this moment mean something. "No, sir," I said. "There's nothing left to try." He nodded once. He looked at Oliver Grant. "Oliver," he said, "take the primary batteries offline, then take the secondary emitters, then the ring structure's power grid." "In that order, sir?" "In that order. Surgical. I want every crew member on that station able to walk off it." Oliver's hands began to move. What happened next is something I have thought about many times since that day, trying to find the right way to describe it to someone who was not there. It was not a battle. A battle requires two sides that can meaningfully contest each other. This was something else. This was the Verity doing what she had been built to do, and it was like watching a skilled surgeon at work, precise and deliberate, and utterly without hesitation. The first primary battery went offline 17 seconds after Oliver began. Not an explosion, not a visible impact. The power readings simply dropped to 0, as if something had reached inside the system and unplugged it. Then the second. Then the third. The Stronghold, that structure that had stood for 900 years and had never once been threatened, began to lose pieces of itself in the way a city loses power during a storm, section by section, the lights going out in sequence, not all at once. By the time Oliver reached the fourth primary battery, the Stronghold had stopped being quiet. I could hear, through the open comm channel, alarms sounding in the background. Not the calm alerts of systems running planned diagnostics, the sharp, continuous sound of systems failing unexpectedly. I could hear voices in the background of the channel too, though I could not make out the words. I did not need to. The tone said everything. The fourth primary battery went offline. The fifth. Donna Price said, "Sir, I'm receiving transmissions from multiple council vessels in the outer fleet. Several of them are broadcasting on the emergency frequency." "What are they saying?" "Most of it is directed at the Stronghold command. They're asking what they should do." She listened for a moment. "Some of them are asking if they should retreat." Captain Marsh said, "Tell them to stay where they are. Tell them no one on this ship will harm them. She passed the message. I watched the 6th primary battery drop offline. The Stronghold's ring structure was dark along its upper section now, the running lights out, the great illuminated panels that had made the station glow, like something important now simply gone. It looked, from the outside, like something that had been turned off. The 7th battery. Oliver said, without looking up. Secondary emitters are next, sir. Continue. The secondaries went faster. They were smaller systems, less deeply integrated into the station's primary power architecture. They dropped in groups of 4 and 5, the sensor returns winking out on my display like stars switching off at dawn. The ring structure was losing its glow section by section, the darkness spreading from where the batteries had been, moving outward and downward through the physical framework of a structure that had been built when humanity was still carving roads into the ground with metal tools. And then Oliver said, "Power grid." Captain Marsh said, "Do it." The Stronghold's primary power grid was a distributed system, intentionally built without a single point of failure, because whoever had designed it 900 years ago had understood that single points of failure were vulnerabilities. It ran through the ring structure in redundant loops, each one capable of sustaining the station if the others failed. Taking it offline required finding every loop and addressing each one, and that was what Oliver Grant did, loop by loop, with the same unhurried, precise movements he had used for everything else. The Stronghold died in sections. It did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply stopped. The towers that had reached out into space went dark. The docking bay lights went out. The communication arrays fell silent. The defense platforms, already offline, became decorative structures attached to a structure that was no longer functioning. The Stronghold, the anchor, the 900-year seat of the Galactic Council's power, became a very large, very dark shape in space. Oliver said, "Power grid is down, sir. Life support systems are on emergency backup. The station is intact. Every person on it is alive and breathing." Captain Marsh said, "Good." I sat at my station and looked at my display and understood, in a very clear and simple way, that the galaxy we lived in was not the same galaxy it had been an hour ago. Donna Price said, "Sir, every channel I have is active. Every species in range, every ship in the fleet, every comm relay broadcasting in this sector." She paused. "They're all watching." Captain Marsh was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Open a general broadcast." Donna opened it. Captain Marsh said, "This is Captain Leon Marsh of humanity. What you have observed today was not an act of aggression. It was a response to one. The Stronghold systems have been shut down. The structure is intact. The crew and residents are safe. The defense fleet's weapons were disabled earlier today without any crew casualties. This was done because we were able to do it, and because doing it this way, rather than any other way, was the right choice." He stopped. Then he continued. "We have never wanted conflict with any species in this galaxy. We have wanted the same thing every species wants, which is the right to exist and grow and move through the universe on our own terms. The Council chose to answer that want with a limitation order, and then with force when we declined to accept it. We have now demonstrated the cost of that choice." He paused again. "The Stronghold systems can be restored. The fleet's weapons can be brought back online by their own engineers. None of what happened today needs to be permanent. What we are asking, and what we are done asking politely, is simply that humanity be treated as an equal in this galaxy. Not above anyone, not below anyone, equal." He waited. Then he said, "We will wait here for a response. We are not leaving until we have one." The channel stayed open. Somewhere on the dark station ahead of us, in rooms that no longer had power except for emergency lighting, the most senior members of the Galactic Council were sitting in the kind of silence that falls on people when the world they believed in stops being available. The response took 4 hours and 11 minutes. 4 hours and 11 minutes during which I stayed at my tactical station and watched the dark shape of the Stronghold and the drifting, disarmed fleet around it, and the open comm channels through which the rest of the galaxy was continuing to receive the silence of an authority that had lost its voice. I had water and a nutrition bar that someone brought around after the second hour. I did not remember eating it. I was watching too many things at once. Not because I expected another attack. The fleet had made no attempt to restore weapons. The Stronghold had made no attempt to restart its systems. Everything was simply still. But because staying focused on the display kept me from going too far into my own head, where the full weight of what had happened was waiting for me. We had shut down the stronghold of the Galactic Council. One ship, 41 people on the command deck. I thought about the engineers who had built the Verity. I thought about them in their facilities, working without announcement or recognition, building systems that the outside world said could not exist, driven not by the need to prove anything to anyone, but simply by the particular human quality that refuses to accept that a thing cannot be done just because no one has done it yet. I thought about the people who had never set foot on a bridge, who would never get a transmission from a ship in the field, who had nonetheless been on this bridge with us today, in every system that responded when we needed it to. Donna Price was the one who flagged the incoming signal. "Sir," she said, and her voice carried something I had not heard in it before, a very slight and quickly controlled tremor. "I'm receiving a transmission from the Stronghold. It's on the formal diplomatic frequency. She checked her board. It's a full council communication. All senior delegates, authenticated and verified." Captain Marsh said, "Put it through." The voice that came over the channel was not Vossi-Tan's. It was a voice I did not recognize, one that identified itself as the speaker for the Suvari delegation, the same group that had tried to call for a pause during the hearing. The Suvari delegate's voice was not layered the way Kethrani voices were. It was a single voice, clear and slightly formal, and I noticed, choosing its words very carefully. "Captain Marsh," it said, "the Galactic Council, in emergency session convened by delegates of 12 member species, has voted to suspend the development limitation order placed on humanity, pending a full review of the accusations of council misconduct entered into the record by Human Representative Gerald Park. Additionally, the council has voted to open negotiations regarding the terms under which humanity may be extended full membership status within the council framework." Captain Marsh said nothing. The delegate continued. "In exchange, we request the restoration of the Stronghold systems and the release of the weapon-disabled fleet vessels. We also request your continued restraint," Captain Marsh said. "What happened to Vossi-Tan's position?" A pause. Then the delegate said, "The Kethrani delegation has stepped back from active participation in this session." That was a diplomatic way of saying something much simpler. I had learned enough about council politics to understand that Vossi-Tan had been the loudest voice for the position, that it just cost the council everything it had built its authority on. When you are surrounded by colleagues who are now explaining to the rest of the galaxy why one human ship shut off your 900-year fortress, stepping back is the most graceful exit available to you. Captain Marsh said, "We accept the suspension of the limitation order and the opening of negotiations. We will not restore the Stronghold systems directly. Your own engineers can do that, but we will not interfere with the process." He paused. "Tell your people they have nothing to fear from us. We did not come here to be their enemies. We came here because you gave us no other option. That changes now." The delegate said, "Understood, and, Captain, on behalf of the Suvari people, and several other species who have long felt that the Council's approach to humanity was in error, we are glad this ended the way it did." Captain Marsh said, "So are we." The channel closed. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then someone laughed, a short, relieved sound from somewhere in the back, and then several people were talking at once, and I leaned back in my seat and let out a breath that I felt like I had been holding since the summons first came in. Captain Marsh walked to the front of the bridge and stood looking at the Stronghold. It was still dark, but I could already see, on my sensor display, the first signs of power coming back in isolated sections, as engineering teams inside began the work of restoration. Slowly, the way a face recovers its expression after shock, the station was beginning to wake up again. It would not wake up the same. Nothing would. Oliver Grant came over and stood beside me. He looked at his board for a moment, then at the viewport, then back at his board. "You know what's going to happen now," he said. "A lot of things are going to happen now," I said. "Yes," he said, "but specifically, every species in this galaxy that has been quietly unhappy with the Council's way of doing things just watched one human ship do what none of them believed was possible. They watched it done cleanly, without unnecessary damage, without a single death." He paused, Some of them are going to want to talk to us. I thought about that. Good, I said. He nodded and went back to his station. Donna Price was monitoring the general broadcast channels. After a while, she said, "Sir, the transmission has reached the outer relay network. It's been picked up and rebroadcast." She paused. "We're getting responses from 9 separate systems. They're not addressed to the Council. They're addressed to us." Captain Marsh turned and looked at her. "What kind of responses?" he asked. She looked at her board for a long moment. Then she said, "Most of them are asking if they can open a diplomatic channel." The captain was quiet. Then he said, "Tell them yes." And outside the viewport, in the space between the Verity and the slowly recovering shape of the Stronghold, the galaxy that had been arranged for 900 years, according to the Council's design, was already rearranging itself into something new. Gerald Park came back aboard 3 hours later, with his team, and with an expression that was the closest thing to joy I had ever seen on a diplomat's face. He shook Captain Marsh's hand without saying anything, because sometimes there is nothing to say that is not already said by the fact that you are both still standing. I thought about the colonies in the outer systems, the people on those worlds who had woken up that morning under the quiet pressure of the Council's limitation order, who would go to sleep that night in a different galaxy than the one they had always known. I thought about what it means to live your whole life being told that the ceiling above you is fixed and permanent, and then to wake up one day and find that someone has removed it. I thought about what Donna Price had said at the beginning of this, when we were still just heading toward a summons on a course that none of us knew the full end of. She had said that the Council had confused patience with weakness. She had said it was the last mistake they were going to make. She was right about the first part. On the last part, I think she was wrong, in a small but important way. It was not the last mistake the Council would ever make. They would make others. Species always do. We do. But it was the last mistake they would ever make about us, about what we were capable of, about the distance between what we appeared to be and what we actually were. That particular mistake, the one that starts with looking at something and deciding you understand it without ever really asking what it can do, they would not make again. The stars outside the viewport were the same stars they had always been. They did not know what had happened today. They did not care. They would burn for 1 billion more years regardless of what any species down here on the small scale of planets and stations and ships decided to do. But down here, on the small scale, things were different now. I saved the day's sensor logs to the record. I wrote my incident report with the same careful, factual language that the service required, detailing positions and times and energy readings, making the extraordinary ordinary through the medium of official documentation. Then I sat back and looked at the display one more time, at the Stronghold coming back to life section by section, at the fleet around it beginning to move in new patterns now that the emergency was over, at the clean, quiet shape of the Verity holding position in the center of all of it like a question that had just been answered. Captain Marsh stopped beside my station on his way to the rear of the bridge. "Good work today, Nathan," he said. I looked up at him. "We're going to be doing a lot of talking in the weeks ahead," he said. "Negotiations. New frameworks. A lot of species wanting to understand what just happened and what it means for them going forward. It's going to be complicated." "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded. "But that's fine," he said. "Complicated means they're taking us seriously." But he looked at the viewport. "That's all we ever asked for." He walked away. I stayed at my station a little while longer, watching the lights of the Stronghold continue to come back on, slow and steady, one section at a time. The galaxy's nightmare, if that was what we were, had arrived in one ship with 41 people on the command deck, and a captain who never raised his voice, and a weapons officer who could disarm 400 ships in 12 seconds, and a communications officer who saw clearly what others missed, and a junior tactical officer who was still not entirely sure he had processed everything that had happened today, and suspected he would be working through it for a very long time. We had not come to be a nightmare. We had come to be heard. The galaxy would learn the difference. Or it would learn why the difference mattered. Either way, it was learning now.